The storm had passed, but its memory lingered. The valley lay hushed beneath a bruised sky. The world washed pale and trembling. The wind, which had howled through the night like a restless spirit, now whispered faintly through the wet grass. Broken twigs, scattered shingles, and the scent of cedar told the story of the long hours before dawn. Eli Carter stepped out from the porch, boots sinking into the soaked ground. His shoulders were square, but his face carried the weight of another long night without sleep. Before him stretched the land he'd tended most of his life, the rolling pastures, the barn with its paint peeling in long, tired streaks, and the fence line now lying jagged and broken where the storm had struck hardest. He pulled his hat low to block the early light. The sun was struggling to climb past the low clouds, its golden edges pushing through like hope itself, trying to return. Behind him came the soft creak of wood. "You're out early," Clara said, her voice still wrapped in sleep. She stood on the porch, wrapped in her faded shawl, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. A steaming cup of coffee rested in her hands, sending up a curl of warmth that danced in the cool air. Eli turned slightly, managing a faint smile. Fence took a beating again. "I figured as much," she replied, looking past him toward the damaged rails. "Wind sounded angry last night. Meanest I've heard all year," he said, stepping down into the yard. "Looks like it tore near 40 feet clean off." Clara walked to the edge of the porch, her bare feet silent on the boards. "Eat first," she said softly. "Then you can go saving the world, one nail at a time." Eli chuckled under his breath. "World ain't big enough for that. I'll settle for the south field." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, one she'd worn since the day they married, the kind that reminded him there was strength even in quiet moments. "Coffee'll be waiting when you're done looking," she said, and turned back toward the kitchen. Eli stood for a long moment, watching her disappear inside. He loved the sound of her voice against the morning air, calm, certain, grounding him when everything else in life seemed to shift like sand. After breakfast, he loaded his tools into the wagon, hammer, nails, saw, and a bundle of fresh planks from the barn. The horses were restless, their tails flicking nervously, still uneasy from the storm. He spoke to them softly, patting their necks before leading them toward the fence line. The field was slick with dew, the grass heavy under his boots. When he reached the broken stretch, he stopped. It looked worse up close. Splintered rails, the corner post cracked, one section half buried in mud. A few feathers clung to the wood. Maybe the storm had driven a bird to shelter there. Eli drew in a breath and set to work. The steady rhythm of hammer and nail began to echo through the field, each strike sure and measured. With every blow, he felt the world around him settle. The sound carried through the valley, a heartbeat against the hush of the morning. As he worked, the clouds began to thin. Beams of sunlight poured down over the hills, catching in the wet grass and turning it to gold. Steam rose faintly where the earth warmed. A hawk circled high overhead, gliding through the air like nothing had changed. From the porch, Clara's voice drifted across the yard. "You missed a spot, Cowboy." Eli paused, glancing up. There she was, standing with her coffee, a smile tugging at her lips, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. He grinned back and raised his hammer in mock salute. "That's what keeps me honest," he called. She laughed, the sound light and bright as wind chimes. For a moment, Eli just stood there, the hammer in his hand, the scent of rain in his lungs, and the woman he loved watching from the porch. There was peace in that, the kind that storms couldn't wash away. He worked through the morning, his muscles burning, his shirt clinging to his back. The land was quiet except for the rhythm of his labor. Wood meeting metal, breath meeting wind. Each repaired board felt like a promise. To the land, to Clara, to himself. When he finally stopped for water, he leaned on the fence and looked across the field. Beyond the repaired stretch lay the pasture where their son Luke used to ride. He remembered the boy's laughter, wild and free, echoing through the same valley that now lay still. Luke had gone 2 years ago, chasing something Eli could never quite name. A future, maybe, or the noise of a world beyond fences. "Storm got you thinking again?" Clara's voice came softly behind him. She'd brought him a plate of biscuits wrapped in cloth, still warm. "Just remembering," Eli said. Clara set the plate on the fence and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You always do after a storm." "Hard not to," he murmured. "Storms tear things apart." Makes a man wonder what's worth putting back together. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes gentle but unyielding. Everything's worth fixing, Eli, she said. Especially what you love. He nodded slowly. Guess you're right. I usually am, she said, smiling faintly before turning back toward the house. Eli watched her go. The light had shifted again, the sun breaking fully through, turning the world bright and new. He wiped the sweat from his brow, picked up his hammer, and went back to work. The fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was memory. It was stubborn hope. It was a man's way of saying, I'm still here. As the afternoon stretched on, the sky cleared into the cleanest blue he'd seen in weeks. Clara's laughter carried from the porch, and Eli paused once more to listen. The fence gleamed in the light, straight and strong again, and he felt something inside him settle. Quiet, steady, ready for whatever came next. Because out here, storms always came. But so did mornings like this, when love, land, and labor met beneath the same forgiving sky. The same forgiving sky. By noon, the world had dried under a pale, forgiving sun. The storm's scars still showed, fallen branches in the creek bed, damp straw clinging to fence posts. But the ranch breathed again. The wind had softened, carrying the smell of sage and wet soil. The scent Eli had always called home. He had repaired half the south fence before his back began to complain. He straightened slowly, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. The hammer hung loosely in his hand, its wooden handle polished smooth by years of use. A shadow passed across the ground. Clara was walking toward him from the house, her skirt brushing the grass, her shawl folded over one arm. She carried a plate covered with a cloth and a jar of lemonade that caught the light like gold. You forget what eating feels like? She asked, her voice gentle but teasing. Eli smiled. Just figured I'd finish this post first. You said that an hour ago. He gave a small laugh, setting the hammer down. Maybe I did, she handed him the plate. Inside were thick slices of cornbread, still warm from the stove, and a bit of salted pork. He ate slowly, standing by the fence watching the land as he chewed. The soil's holding water better this year, he said between bites. Might get a good crop out of the north field if the weather stays kind. Kind, Clara echoed softly. That's a word the sky doesn't know. Eli glanced up at the horizon. Clouds gathered faintly in the distance again, a soft gray smudge above the hills. We'll take what we get. They ate together in the quiet. The only sounds were the rustle of grass and the low murmur of bees near the wildflowers that had survived the wind. Clara's eyes drifted toward the pasture where the horses grazed, their tails flicking lazily. You remember when Luke used to race them? Eli's hand froze halfway to his mouth. Every day after chores, he said quietly. Couldn't get that boy to stay still long enough to eat. Clara smiled faintly. He jumped the fence instead of using the gate. Said gates were for folks with nowhere to be. A silence followed, soft but full. The kind that lives between two people who know the same ache. He'll write again, Clara said finally. I sent another letter last week. Eli's gaze lingered on the hills. You always send letters. And one day he'll answer, she said, her voice steady but tender. A mother has to believe that. Eli set down the plate. You think he misses this place? I think he misses what he hasn't found yet, she replied. The land will call him when it's time. He nodded slowly, then bent to pick up his hammer again. Then I'll keep it ready for him. Clara's eyes softened. You always do. She watched him for a while as he worked. The slow, deliberate rhythm of the hammer, the muscles moving beneath the worn denim of his shirt. Each strike was steady, almost prayerful. She knew the sound well. It had filled their life together. The sound of her husband talking to the earth, making it whole again. When she finally turned back toward the house, Eli straightened and watched her go. Her figure was small against the wide sky, but somehow she filled all of it. The day wore on. The sun dipped lower, bathing everything in that familiar honey-colored light that made the dust shimmer. Eli wiped his brow and took a long drink of water, leaning against the finished section of fence. He looked down the line of new wood, smooth, straight, bright against the older rails. It reminded him of himself in a way, patched, weathered, but still standing. His father used to tell him, a man's worth is measured in what he mends. Back then, Eli hadn't understood. but now with calloused hands and a field that bore his name. He knew exactly what it meant. Late in the afternoon, the sound of thunder rumbled faintly from far away, not threatening yet, just a reminder that the world never truly rested. Eli squinted toward the western ridge, where the clouds were gathering again like thoughts too heavy to carry. He sighed, pushing the last nail into place. "Not again," he murmured to himself. As if in answer, Clara's voice floated across the field. "Don't you dare speak it into being." He turned to see her standing on the porch, hands on her hips, a spark of laughter in her eyes. Eli grinned. "You think I've got that kind of power? I think you've tempted the sky before." He chuckled, tossing the hammer into the toolbox. "Sky's got a mean streak." "So do you," she said. He walked back toward the house as the wind began to rise again. Gentle, playful this time. When he reached the porch, Clara handed him a towel. "You've been out there long enough." He wiped his hands, glancing back at the fence stretching along the horizon. "She's whole again." Clara followed his gaze. "Until the next storm," she said softly. "Yeah," Eli agreed. Until then, they stood side by side, watching the land breathe beneath the fading light. The air smelled of rain again, faint, sweet, uncertain. Clara rested her hand lightly on his arm. "You know," she whispered, "you can't fix the weather." Eli smiled. "Maybe not. But I can sure as hell fix what it breaks." Her laughter was low and warm. "That's my cowboy." The sky deepened into amber, then red, then a soft violet. The first stars appeared above the hills as they turned back toward the house. The storm might come again tomorrow or the next day, but tonight there was peace. The kind that settles over land and love alike, when both have been tended with care. As Eli closed the barn door for the night, he paused to look out one last time at the repaired fence gleaming in the twilight. He thought of Luke, of storms yet to come, and of the woman waiting inside with a lamp burning in the window. The land remembered, and so did he. And so did he. The next dawn came quietly. No thunder, no wind, only the soft hum of crickets and the slow awakening of the land. The air was cool and clean, the kind that feels like forgiveness. The storm had passed fully now, leaving the world bright and breathing again. Eli Carter rose early, as he always did. Habit pulled him from sleep before the rooster even thought to crow. He lit the stove, brewed the coffee, and stood by the window, watching the mist drift low over the pasture. The repaired fence stood straight and proud against the morning light, solid proof that effort and patience could still hold something together. He took his mug and stepped outside. The boards of the porch creaked under his weight, familiar music to his boots. Across the yard, the wet grass sparkled like a scatter of silver coins. Somewhere near the barn, a horse nickered softly, shaking off the dew. For the first time in a long while, Eli allowed himself to just breathe. There were no hammers to swing, no storms to chase off, only the wide, waiting silence of a new day. He heard Clara's footsteps before he saw her. She came out wrapped in her shawl, her hair pinned loosely back, eyes still soft with sleep. "You're up before the sun again," she said, smiling. "Old habits die harder than old fences," Eli replied, handing her the mug. She sipped, her gaze following his out toward the hills. "It's holding well," she said. "Looks better than before," he nodded. "Sometimes the mended parts turn out stronger than the new." Clara's lips curved faintly. "You talking about the fence or us?" Eli looked at her, his eyes warm. "Both, maybe." She laughed softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. They stood together in silence, the kind that feels more like a shared heartbeat than the absence of words. Then, from far down the dirt road, came a low sound. Faint at first, then clearer. A hum, a rattle, the familiar growl of a truck engine climbing the hill. Eli frowned slightly, setting his cup on the railing. "You expecting anyone?" Clara shook her head. "Not a soul." They watched as a small dust cloud rose behind the approaching truck. Its tires kicked up the dry road as it came closer, slowing as it reached the gate. The motor sputtered, coughed, and went quiet. A man stepped out. He was taller than Eli remembered, lean from travel, his hair longer, face rough with stubble. He stood for a moment beside the truck, as if the land itself might turn him away if he moved too fast. Then Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Eli?" she whispered. "It's him." Eli didn't answer. His throat felt tight, his chest heavier than the morning air. He took a slow step forward. Luke lifted his hat slightly, unsure, his voice rough with distance. "Hey, Pa." Eli stopped a few paces from him. For a long heartbeat, they just looked at each other, father and son, separated by more than miles. The land between them seemed to hold every word they'd never said. Finally, Eli nodded once. "You're a long way from the city." Luke smiled, sheepish. "Couldn't stay there no more." "It ain't home." Behind them, Clara was already running down the path, tears shining in her eyes. She reached her son and pulled him into her arms, clinging as though afraid he might vanish again. Luke held her tightly, his voice breaking. "I missed you, Ma, missed all of it." Eli looked away, blinking hard. When he finally stepped forward, Luke turned toward him, uncertain. Eli studied him for a moment, the lines in his face, the dust on his boots, the weariness in his eyes. Then he reached out and gripped his son's shoulder. "Took you long enough," he said gruffly. Luke smiled through the emotion. "Road's long, Pa." Eli's hand tightened. "Always is." For a moment, that was enough. No speeches, no apologies, just the quiet truth between them. Clara led Luke up the porch, talking fast and laughing between tears, fussing over his worn coat and empty stomach. Eli followed behind, listening to their voices fill the house again, filling spaces that had been empty for far too long. Over breakfast, Luke told them stories of the city, the noise, the crowds, the work that never lasted. He spoke of jobs that promised everything and gave nothing, of nights where he dreamt of the smell of hay and the creak of the barn door. "I kept thinking," Luke said quietly, "about how you used to fix fences. No matter how many times they broke, you'd build them again. Guess I figured I needed to come back and learn how to do that, not just with wood." Eli looked at him for a long time before answering. "You learn it by doing, son. Storms come for everyone. What matters is what you mend after." Luke nodded, eyes shining. "Then I'm ready to mend." That afternoon, the two of them went out together to the pasture. The air was warm, the light sharp and clean. Eli handed Luke a hammer and pointed to a loose rail near the barn. "Start with that one." Luke smiled, taking the tool. "You watching to make sure I don't mess it up?" "Watching to make sure you do it right," Eli said, though there was laughter in his voice. They worked side by side as Clara watched from the porch, coffee cup in hand. The sound of their hammers echoed together, steady, rhythmic, the language of men who repair instead of run. As the sun began to sink, painting the hills in orange and gold, Eli leaned against the finished fence, breathing in the quiet satisfaction that only work and family could bring. Luke stood beside him, dust on his hands, pride on his face. "She'll hold through the next one," Luke said, nodding toward the fence. Eli smiled faintly. "She always does." The evening deepened into soft purples. The air turned cool, the wind carrying the smell of pine and rain from far away. From the porch, Clara's voice called, "Supper's on, you two. Don't keep the stew waiting." Eli turned toward her voice, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Coming," he called back. They walked together toward the house, father, son, and the long shadow of the setting sun stretching before them. The land glowed like something alive, something sacred. When night finally fell, the three of them sat on the porch beneath the wide western sky. The stars burned bright and endless. Crickets sang. The old dog dozed by the steps. Eli looked at his family, his wife, his boy, and then at the repaired fence running along the dark horizon. He felt the kind of peace that comes only after storms, the peace of knowing that what is broken can be rebuilt, and what is lost can still find its way home. He reached for Clara's hand and held it. Luke leaned back in his chair, staring up at the stars he hadn't seen in years. The wind stirred the dry grass, whispering softly across the field. Not angry now, but tender, like a prayer. Eli closed his eyes and listened, because some storms, he thought, don't come to destroy. They come to remind you what's worth holding on to,